Every month on Twitch for the past year, I've done a different artist study. The artists have all been chosen by my viewers, and many of them are artists that I would have never thought to look at on my own. Each time I learn a ton, in no small part thanks to the contribution of my viewers in chat, who offer their feedback, their thoughts, and their analysis of the works that we're studying. It's been extremely beneficial to my own artistic practice. It's helped me look at things in different ways and think about things I never would have considered. It's also helped me improve my artist study skills, which is an important skill in and of itself. After Dr. Seuss and Norman Rockwell, the next two artists I looked at were Alphonse Mucha and Maurice Sendak. So these are the 5 images I chose to study for Mucha. Mucha, of all the studies I've done, it might be my favorite one. Looking at Mucha was a revelation. Of course, I'd seen his work around, but doing this, like looking at his pieces, drawing each one, and kind of gradually deconstructing them, it was extremely informative. And you can see, I took some notes. Most of it was just looking, drawing, and noticing. I find if I'm doing drawings from it, things start to become more clear. So kind of reverse engineering. So the number one most important thing that I learned from studying Mucha was the sheer variety of ways of indicating focal point. In all of these, I think the focal point is probably the eye, definitely the face of the figure, but it seems to be the eye and maybe the mouth. Obviously, placement in the composition is important. The kind of dominant part of the composition here. I think one of the most common and maybe one of the most powerful ways of getting focal point is using contrast. That's a fairly standard one. We can see here the dark of this shape and the light of this shape is one of the more, if not the most, high contrast parts of the composition. But it doesn't stop there. So one thing that I was really interested in is his kind of these several kinds of gradients. So we can see here, obviously in the background, this is darker, and there's a gradation going down, this kind of lighter color, and same within the figure. These colors are just a little bit softer, maybe a little bit less color contrast as well. But he has these gradients also of shape. So we have these more straight line, more rectangular shapes, and then that kind of evolves into this kind of more curved shape. So it's the rectangle with a curve on it, and then that becomes this circle, which is the focal point, like a target. And then back here, it goes back and it turns back into that rectangle. And so it's kind of like a frame, using shape and line as a frame in that way. I'm also interested in these kind of concentric uses of pattern and space. So we see the eye here is quite highly rendered, very detailed, but it's surrounded by this big shape that is mostly flat. And then around that, we get back into this line work here, more detail, and this detailed pattern. And then around that is this white shape here. So it's kind of sort of a concentric, detailed to less detailed, to more detailed, to less detailed. He does that in a lot of his pieces. He's also using the density of the patterns. I think that this pattern here in this area is the most dense pattern work right up against where the face would be. So this kind of contrast here, the density of the patterning, and then kind of the visual interest of the patterning as well. And as we get up into this section, it's obscured, but it's less of a dense pattern here. Even in the hair, the patterning is a bit less dense. And then I feel like this is less dense and this is less dense. Just less variety. Like here, the lines make it kind of dense if you're thinking about it in a certain way. But I mean, there's basically 2 elements. There's this interior part and this exterior part. It reads to me as sort of less hectic or less, maybe less visually interesting. And that's also kind of a gradient going there to there. He's creating this kind of like this gravity well around the face and kind of drawing us in. I also think that the most saturated colors are in this area. I mean, we have the saturated colors of these flowers. There's a bit of saturated red here and here, kind of making another circle. And then in the face, the lips and the cheek is a little bit more saturated too, whereas some of these reds and the flesh tone maybe has a little bit less of that going on. And if we look at it like this, all the darks are grouped up here. Everything down here is mostly middle gray, and there's some white. And the darkest darks are all saved for top part of the composition. And if we look at this one, there's some similar things. So there's still that kind of more rectangular, more straight line. And then this is sort of a halfway step with the one curved line here. And then it turns into the circle. So this kind of shape gradient again. And then it goes back into this kind of a trope of his, I suppose. It's effective. You probably could just show these big shapes with nothing in it, and you could identify that as a Mucha. A lot of his pieces had a sort of secondary focal point. So this is an ad for gin, I believe. And so the main focal point, of course, is here. And then he uses these effective tools to bring the eye down. A little bit of that saturated color here. But up in the main focal point, again, we have the more detailed eyes surrounded by this big sort of empty shape of the face. Then we have this really complex collar and some detail in the hair and this kind of floral patterning, the headdress or whatever. And then there's this ring here that is less detailed. It's more kind of regular. But even in that less detail, it is all pointing us into the center of the circle. And then we have this ring that is more dense. I think I would consider this to be more dense than that. So we get this gravity well drawing us into the middle here. It's interesting how not only this shape and the hand bring us down, but also the gaze looking at the bottle. I was kind of noticing in most of these that the eyes do not look at the viewer. And so he's not using that to draw our attention here, except in the Medeo one. We'll see in a minute. And then all this area down here, basically, except for the bottle, it's almost grayscale. The drapery is quite lovely, but it's very subtle. It's understated. We're meant to be looking here. It's pretty clear. This one here, he uses, not the shapes like in the other ones, but he has this splash of blue, this very saturated splash of blue in the background up against this orange of the hair. And the blue is a gradient. So it's getting, from a gray up to a saturated blue behind the head of the figure. And again, we have the eyes surrounded by this big open shape. And then there's some more detail in the hair. And this is kind of a detailed frame as well. It's also interesting. There's an overlap here, So the figure goes from overlapped to foreground to overlapped. And then this big unoverlapped section here is all foreground. So the less important part is more subdued maybe by that, whereas the part we're supposed to look at is completely unobstructed. So this one here, this is, like I said before, this is the only one where the figure is staring straight at us. And man, that's effective. The horror, right? I think she's murdered her child or children. But once again, these kind of shapes evolving into a more circular form, and the circles in the background. More detail here, and then this kind of more open space, and then this very detailed frame here. We have these radiating forms like in the second one, and then these circles of less detail, making that pattern, drawing us in again. And this one I think has 3 focal points. The main one, of course, is the face. And maybe because there's 3 in this one, maybe that's a good reason for the staring at the viewer. But we're brought down here. I think this is number 2. Then the knife is pointing straight down these other figures on the ground. And also the text kind of draws us down. But it's interesting in all of these that the text is, at least to my eye, maybe secondary to the images. Even though it's got all the information, it's kind of a supporting detail rather than driving the compositions. And you can even see that in this one. Like the actor, I think was quite famous. You wouldn't even need to see the first name; it's hidden behind this plant, so we only see the surname here. And again, detail surrounded by this open form, surrounded by another layer of detail. I think this, even though there's kind of a lot of tiling going on, if you blur your eyes, it kind of feels open. The gradient on the clothing here at the top is very detailed here, and then it kind of gradually fades out moves down, and then we get to the bottom, and there's almost no detail whatsoever happening there. And we can see the contrast, the light and the dark here. And once again, almost all of the dark shapes are on the top, and the bottom is fairly homogeneous gray. And so for me, that is the big takeaway from looking at Mucha. The amazing use of focal point in all of his works. You look exactly where he wants you to look. At least I do. So Maurice Sendak is not an artist I was very familiar with at all. I knew he wrote and illustrated Where the Wild Things Are, but that was a book that I'm sure I read as a kid, but I don't have any strong memories or feelings of it. So this was a total blank spot for me, his work. I know there are people who absolutely love him and love what he did. Somehow I missed it. And with Mucha, it was very obvious what the big takeaway was. And with Sendak, it was not so much. I had to really think about what it is that he was doing that kind of stood out to me. I mean, obviously, he did some beautiful work, but so having to choose one kind of big takeaway from what he did, it would be these really subtle perspective tweaks that are in the service of his storytelling. So let's take a look at some of those. So what I mean by kind of tweaks of the perspective, maybe calling it tweaks of perspective is the wrong word, but for lack of a better term, you can see the angle on the moon here. It's elongated in this direction. I feel like he does that for compositional purposes. There's kind of almost a conversation going on between these two forms. And it's almost as if the moon is maybe being anthropomorphized, or maybe it's a symbol for something that's anthropomorphized by this character. Also, how the bed frame comes up just below his eye level. It's almost like he's peeking out from behind a wall. The bed is a protected place. It's not exactly perspective. I think it's a little bit exaggerated, and we'll see another example of that later on. Kind of as a storytelling piece here. And then I think, like with this one, if our floor plane was here, these would not exactly be in the right perspective, I think. I think if we tried to bring this all, kind of unify it, I'm not sure that these would all recede to the same place. I'm not sure if this window would kind of fit in the correct perspective, but the point, at least to my eye, is that there's this kind of void, right? We're not in a space. We're in this imaginary kind of world where none of that stuff is really important. What matters is the mood. What matters is how you feel when you look at it. And the fact that, like, this window, also not in perspective, but this part here has kind of a depth to it. But once we get to the part that touches the outside, you'd think that there might be some depth here. Maybe we would see it on the underside. It's hard to see where we would see it, but the window is totally flat when we get to the part that's interfacing with the outside. That's an interesting choice as well. I've seen a lot of Sendak's work, doing this study, and it's obvious he knows how to do perspective correctly, and so this would be a decision. If we look in this one again, like this is wonky. I don't think that this is the wall, I think, or this is it's hard to even tell, but I don't feel like it exists correctly in the same space as this. It's not so unified, but I think there's a reason for that. Everything is kind of being strewn about. Everything is moving. There's a sense of chaos happening. All of a sudden, this wind is busting in and moving things around. That just adds to that feeling. In this one, again, the moon, the axis of the moon. So he doesn't draw them as perfect circles. He's drawing it with an axis. I think that's for the sake of the composition. We'll move through the title here, and then the shape of the moon kind of brings us down. And the bed in this one, you can see it's just kind of too tall and too squat in this direction. And I think this is, maybe how a kid would imagine it. There's that phrase like climb into bed. For me, like I fall into bed, but when you're a kid, you got to like climb up into it. And so this is this tall kind of thing that you have to work hard to get into. It also looks like it's wider here than it is here. And it's just a little bit off. And I think the rest of the perspective is kind of correct in this room. This bed is like maybe a vehicle for imagination, right? When you dream. And so this is the thing that's a little bit askew. And then we get away from this into the real world, this looks good to me. And we have a moon that's a circle now, so it's not an oval, at least not as much as the other ones. So I think he's returning home, and all of that is as it should be. It's just that his vehicle of imagination is the thing that's still a little bit off, of course, in the clothes. So with Sendak, it was pretty subtle. And with Mucha, once I started looking, I was seeing it everywhere. It was super obvious. Studying these two artists back to back, and now going back, a year later and re-exploring and rediscovering what I found back then, it's an interesting pairing going from Mucha to Sendak. So I did a video of Dr. Seuss and Norman Rockwell. You can see that. It's linked in the comments for the first two tricks that I learned from my first two artist studies. And my next two studies, I did a perspective study. So that was looking at a bunch of different artists and how they used perspective. And then following that was Miyazaki. And so the next video in this series will be looking at perspective and Miyazaki. So make sure to subscribe and like if you want YouTube to show you that next video when it comes out. Please do check out the other one. And the full artist studies, all of them that I've done, are in a big old playlist on my channel as well. So thank you for watching, and see you next time. I also want to say that coincidentally, right after doing this Mucha study, I was in Prague, and the Mucha Museum is in Prague. I highly recommend it if you find yourself there. And then I was in a bookstore and saw this. This is the Taschen Mucha book. It's a thin one and affordable, and just a really good resource. It has beautiful reproductions. Just a side note, I can recommend this book.